Okay.
Okay, ready to go.
So, welcome everybody to the first SVFR Budget Committee meeting of the year. It's your first budget committee. Dina and I have been through like 150. It seems like we certainly appreciate everybody being here tonight to help us with this very important process. And now I'm going to share my screen and you should see my slides.
Yep.
Okay. So I'll call the April 15th SVFR Budget Committee meeting to order. Some Zoom suggestions for our participants. It helps if you, well, let me get to the right slide here. That would help too. It helps if you mute your microphone, keep background noise down other than during roll call or doing any votes, or if you have a question or comment, of course. My computer has a habit of freezing at least once during a Zoom meeting. So if that happens, just let me know and I'll back up. We just had our IT company come through and they washed and waxed my computer. So hopefully it's not going to be an issue, but if it does, it does. So if your computer freezes or you lose connection, let us know when you get back in and we'll bring you up to date. If you can't get back in, call Dina and we'll see if we can get you reconnected either via computer or via phone. Tonight we'll be using Robert's Rules of Order for this meeting. If you can, use the raise your hand tool if you'd like to speak. It'll briefly show up on my computer that your hand is raised. I'll get a little note. But Dina will be watching for that. If we do miss your hand, just please speak up. I mean, it's important that we hear what you have to say. As a reminder, all discussions about the budget that takes place excuse me, between committee members must be in a public meeting. You're welcome anytime to approach staff with any requests for additional information or explanations. Okay, Holly, can we have a roll call, please?
SVFR directors, Director Hickson,
Here.
Director Polisi,
Here.
Director Spade,
Here.
Director Green,
Here.
Director Burns, Budget Committee members, John Murphy, Ann Stonelake, Raymond Hull,
Here.
Aaron Houston,
Here.
Marvin Tipler.
Here.
Okay, our quorum is 6 and we have 7, so we have a quorum. So you received the budget package and our budget message, and I just wanted to go over a few highlights of the budget message. And there you can see part of our agenda. First of all, I want to start off by acknowledging tremendous work by Dina and her staff, which has brought a lot of clarity to our financial position. I think it's important to remember that all the hard work by staff to prepare these budgets has to be multiplied by 2 since we have 2 districts we're running. Well, really 3 when you include the authority. But just to focus on SVFR, we believe financial position for SVFR is good and continuing to improve. I think it was about 2 years ago, we were still trying to understand what our financial position really was. And then the board reset our permanent levy rate, which brought in some much needed funding. But then, last year we added the uncertainty of labor negotiations, throw on top of that a pandemic. Labor negotiations are complete and we're through that. And although we're still in the midst of a pandemic, it hasn't resulted in any negative impacts on our financial position. Of course, our main expenses, like anybody, is going to be in personnel services. And historically, we've seen an average increase in wages at about 5.7%. And for fiscal year 22, we're proposing a 1.5% increase for a cost of living allowance, a COLA, and that was what we agreed upon in the new contract. That's a little bit deceptive. It's close, but actually wages are going up a little bit more than that. The reason for that, we're using what we call it's a 7K. That references the FLSA paragraph, which talks about a special schedule for firefighters. And in that schedule, firefighters get overtime over 53 hours in a week, which is different than the normal 40 hours in a week. We had two promotions, which of course their wages increased with the promotions. And then we're also increasing wages, and we'll talk about this, but we went from 100% employer coverage healthcare to a 95-5 split. So the employees paying 5%, and we agreed to a 1% or a one-time increase in employee wages to cover that 5% of the healthcare. And like I said, we'll talk about that. So it appears like we'll be closer to the historical average, although increases in wages are being offset by decreases in other benefits. And then speaking of healthcare, again, historically, another big cost for us. And typically, we see about an 8.4% increase in healthcare every year. We've been told by our provider that there will be no increase for fiscal year 22. And I'm hopeful that's true. I say I'm hopeful because I think last year they told us about this time it was going to be a 15% increase, and then they dropped way down from that. So, but I'm hopeful that we'll actually see an overall decrease since the employees are going to be helping out with the health care. Property tax revenue continues to increase. We get the state mandated 3%, or we can go up 3%. It's typically over that because we get the any new construction or property improvements. Like I said earlier, we have a very positive outlook on our financial conditions at the moment, but we do have a couple areas we're watching closely. First of all, depending on the goals and objectives in our new strategic plan, we may have to make some changes in the budget. If the strategic plan does include moving all employees to the authority, for example, I don't foresee any major changes to our budget. Revenue and expenditures would simply be moved to the authority, so they wouldn't change. The second one, we haven't seen any impact to date from COVID on our tax collections, which would be associated with a decrease in assessed valuation. So if property values fell due to the pandemic, then we would see probably our tax collections decrease. But we haven't seen that. But if we do have an extended pandemic, I guess theoretically it could bring some changes, but certainly not year to date or for the last year and a half have we seen anything. Okay, that's just a review of the budget message. Now we need to appoint a committee chairperson. This can be anyone on the committee, director or citizen. If there's more than one nomination, we'll vote on each nomination in order. We'll stop once someone receives the majority of positive votes. So do I have a nomination for chairperson?
I'd nominate Marvin Tipler.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second,
Okay, Ned Hickson, second.
Jim. Well,
Sorry, Jim, I'll get you on the next one.
that's all right.
Other nominations? Okay, hearing none. Holly, can you do a roll call vote?
SVFR directors, Ned Hickson,
Yes.
Jim Polisi,
Yes.
Sam Spade,
Yes.
Ron Green,
Yes.
budget committee members, Raymond Hull,
Yes.
Aaron Houston,
Yes.
Marvin Tipler.
Yes.
Awesome, congratulations. So Marvin gets paid twice as much as the rest of you for this, but I didn't want to tell you that at first, or everybody want to be chair. But
Well, we can do the math. 2 times 0 is still 0.
We are a bunch of finance people, so yeah.
Yeah, right. So Marvin, it's okay. I'll run the meeting until we get to the budget discussion, and then you can moderate the debate if that's okay.
That's perfect. I was going to just say, I would like to turn the budget meeting over to the budget officer.
Oh, okay, awesome. So first thing we need to do is approve the minutes of the May 7th, 2020 meeting. Are there any changes to the minutes?
I
there a
would so
motion?
move to approve.
Okay, that was Marvin.
I'll second.
Okay.
Who
Any
seconded?
discussion?
Ned.
That was Ned. Any discussion? Okay, Holly, can you do a roll call vote?
SVFR directors, Ned Hickson,
Yes.
Jim Policy,
Yes.
Sam Spade,
Yes.
Ron Green,
Yes.
budget committee members, Raymond Hull,
Yes.
Aaron Houston,
Yes.
and Marvin Tippler.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for that. Dina, has anybody signed up for public comments?
No, we do have some public in the audience, and if they would like to speak, otherwise we have no one.
Is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak? Okay, we'll go on to, let's get into our budget. So I've divided the proposed budget into smaller slides, so you'll see it on your screen. I'll have summary slides for each area. The line numbers you see on these slides should correspond to the line numbers on the budgets we sent to you earlier this week. Please ask a question if you have about any of the line items. What I would like to do, if everyone agrees to it, would be to go through the budget, review it, answer any questions, and then at the end we can address any proposed changes and then vote on that. Is anybody against that process?
Chief, I just have a more of a housekeeping question, if I may.
Absolutely.
And I believe there was some reference in the packet, so maybe we don't have to reiterate that, but recognizing there's, 2 new members, is it necessary for you to describe kind of by statute or by at least by practice what the role and responsibilities are of this committee?
I did that with an orientation last week.
Okay, perfect.
I think Aaron was there. I don't think Mr. Hull was there. Correct, you were there, Aaron, right? Or were you? No, you weren't there.
I was there. Yes, I was.
You were there. Okay. We got so many meetings. Okay, so you've been through it. So yeah, no, that's not a bad idea.
But Chief,
Yes.
I can't find the raise your hand anywhere, so I'm doing it old school. I was not at the meeting, the training you had, but I did watch the video of it afterwards.
Oh, perfect. So I think, Ron, so the new ones have gone through our orientation. So that's a good question, though.
Ned has his hand up.
Mr. Hickson.
Oh, you're clapping your hands. Okay.
Don't confuse us. Okay, so there's also been some minor modifications after the budget was sent to you or released. I'll highlight those in red. And I'm just going to really focus on those areas I feel are most important, but of course, I'm more than happy to go into detail on any of the line items. We'll be happy to answer your questions. And we're going to start off by looking at our historical and proposed resources. And our carryover, which is what we call our net working capital, is looking very healthy. You see it in red here because there was a little minor change. Last year we had set aside some money for to address some retirement issue, our PERS, and we call that our PERS set aside. So that number is actually a little bit bigger than what we had given to you at first. And of course, our carryover is looking good because, as you can see, let me see if I can get my pointer going here. From fiscal year 20 to 21, we had that increase. Well, here we had the increase in our permanent levy, which helped quite a bit. Another change is you may see that our administrative IGA funding has gone away as a resource. That represents payments from Western Lane Ambulance District to SVFR. Of course, with the formation of WellFIA, those payments are no longer necessary. And we do continue to focus on grant opportunities when we can. So you'll see a lot of our resources are based on grants, and those may or may not happen during the year, but we have to budget for them just in case they do. So I do have another slide on resources, and most of the I think the single pages that you have on certain areas of the budget, I'll have broken down into several slides, just to make it easier to read.
Chief Ron Green has his hand up.
Yes, Mr. Green.
Apologize for not having the financial statement memorized. Um, But just as a point of clarification, when you talk about the carry forward and or net working capital, and I'm sorry that we always kind of ask this year after year, but that does not include, or does it, I guess, does it include any reserve for capital expenditures? That's strictly operating cash, correct?
That's yeah, the capital funds, we have two capital funds and those are considered separate.
Now, if you were to budget to disperse any of the capital funds during the fiscal year, would you then have offsetting resources and expenditures of like amounts?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And you'll see that as we get into expenditures. Yes, you'll see that. In fact, I think on the next page, no, you don't. Hey, do we show grant?
Yeah, well,
Where does the grant?
it's further in the budget. The last couple pages show the capital reserves.
Would that be considered a resource?
Well, there's a separate fund-ish, you know, I mean, they're,
Oh, there's our capital improvement fund right there,
yeah.
right at the bottom.
So the capitals are, we're treating them as separate funds, even though they're just accounts.
Yes, so we will see them. Okay. Continuing with resources, I said property taxes continue to increase annually by 3%, a little bit over 3%, 3.6%. Important to remember that we do cover a little bit of Douglas County. We have a few properties down there. We don't get a lot of money, and I don't remember the last time we had a call down there, but we do have a couple residents down there. So total resources for fiscal year 22 would be $5,876,926. Again, that's including that PERS set aside that we forgot. So that number is a little bit bigger, about 150,000 bigger, I think, than what we had originally given to you. So any more questions on our resources? And again, at the end, we'll actually be going over the budget twice. First time just to get all the questions out of the way, and then if there's any changes that the committee is suggesting, we can discuss those and vote on those. Now we'll go into our expenditures or requirements. First off is personnel services, which typically is the area of greatest expense for most organizations and ours as well. So you'll see that our total staffing numbers have decreased, but actually we have better coverage now since we've gone to 24/7 staffing. We did move the fire chief and the fire ops chief to Welfia. And over last year, or year before, we dropped a training officer and our grant funded recruitment coordinator. That grant ended in November. So that person or that position has gone away. One change you will see is that this represented 5 firefighter engineers the current year. And then during the year, we moved to 2 lieutenants and 3 firefighter engineers. So fiscal year 22, that represents the 2 lieutenants and 3 firefighter engineers. So it's just same people, we promoted 2. And then we hired them midway through the year. Within the wages, of course, there was that 1.5% COLA for this year, and there'll be another 1.5% COLA next year. They had also agreed to go from 100% employer-paid healthcare to a 95-5 split, and we'll see that when we get to benefits. But they agreed to do that if the district would agree to raise wages to cover that 5% of their healthcare costs. I think it was anywhere from $500 a year to $1,500 a year was the most. But then we get that money back because it's paying for their healthcare. So it's essentially a wash for the district. Overtime is a little bit different than what we did last year. We've broken it down to give you a little bit more detail. As we went to the 56-hour work week, it results in 3 hours a week, approximately 3 hours a week in scheduled overtime. So that's just part of the schedule. So that we can predict, that we know pretty much what it's going to be for the whole year. It's the additional overtime we don't know, and it is a little bit high here. It's a new schedule for us. I don't think it's going to be this high. I think that's a worst case scenario. So I'm comfortable. I know it's not going to exceed that. Part-time, this is part-time overtime, and we'll see part-time wages on the next page. Again, it's pretty high, but they're on a 40-hour work week. So if you have a part-time firefighter working, one 24-hour shift and then works another shift, they get into a lot of overtime pretty quick. We are seriously considering increasing our full-time staffing by another firefighter per shift. So there'll be a total of 3 new firefighters. And if we do that, then we will drop our part-time wages and our part-time overtime probably quite a bit. Okay.
Chief,
Yes.
Ray Hull, old school again.
Uh-huh.
I just wanted to comment on the overtime there. You explained the first part. I was wondering, why did it almost double from actually more than double from the last few years? You explained that just now. However, going to the handout much further down the page, it looks like the recruitment budget to actual this year is very low as a percent of budget to expense. And I just know that frequently overtime is tied with staffing shortages. I'm curious, is that a factor in why this more than double, that you're not able to recruit staff, or is there a relationship at all?
Yeah, no, it is. Maybe not how you're thinking, but it actually is. Yeah, the recruitment is mainly to recruit volunteers. And just like every other volunteer fire department in the country, or every fire department that relies on volunteers like we do, it's really tough to get them. So part of that decrease was we had a person that was funded by a grant. And so we had a lot of costs that were paid for by the grant. A lot of recruitment costs, such as training. The grant paid for training, paid for gear, paid for like their health exams, their physicals. So we as the grant went away, those reimbursed costs went away. So we have absorbed a lot of those into other areas. So we have increased part-time staffing, and we'll talk a little bit about that, just to make sure that we have enough people at the fire station. So yeah, indirectly, it's just a real struggle to recruit and to get volunteers. And so to properly staff, to staff safely, yeah, we have increased our part-time cost. And did that answer your question, Mr. Hall?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and you'll hear more about that. That's a good question, and I think I've got some other areas where I focus on that. But that was a good catch. And you see in previous years, we have split our part-time compensation away from our volunteer compensation. Previous years, they were all combined, but we know we are relying more on part-time firefighters. And like I said, we continue to experience high turnover in our volunteer ranks. And it is a constant struggle to keep finding and training new volunteers. It's a struggle we're fully committed to, but we've had to rely, like I said, a lot on our part-time firefighters.
I'll do old school hands up too, because I can't find the button either.
That is fine. There's no problem with that.
Could you quickly explain the difference between a part-time firefighter and a volunteer firefighter?
Sure. Part-time firefighter is paid hourly. I believe it's $15 an hour. And then a volunteer, of course, is not an employee. They can receive some compensation, such as a stipend, which is why we have that volunteer firefighter line there. So don't quote me, I think they get $75 for a 12-hour shift and $150 for a 24-hour shift. And that's just IRS approved. It's legal to do it that way. Once you start paying them an hourly wage, then they're no longer a volunteer in the eyes of the IRS. They become an employee. And
So are they the same people, or do they choose to either be a volunteer or a part-time firefighter.
Yeah, you can't move back and forth. You have to pick one and stay with that.
Got it.
Yeah, and so a part-time firefighter would be a part-time employee. So you cannot be an employee and volunteer for the same organization. Good question. And we hope to, I think this is a little high, and I think that opens up a window for us to say, okay, let's think about adding a full-time firefighter to our staffing. And I think if we do that, we can drop some of our part-time staffing that we have to do. Our staffing will be more consistent. And I think it really ties in with what we want to do with Western Lane Ambulance District as far as sharing employees too. And we've dropped our resident stipends. Those were firefighters that actually lived here at the station. That program is sort of, we ran out of room, really. We wanted to, once we went to the 24/7 staffing with career firefighters, and the program was ending anyway. So a lot of those residents became part-time firefighters with us, but we have no more need for that. And a part-time prevention position that we had in the past, we're proposing to increase the hours of one of our admin assistants in Welfia, the authority to help out our fire marshal with any prevention paperwork or administrative duties. Okay. Now looking at budget numbers for benefits. Like I said, we have some good news concerning healthcare. You see that it actually went down. That's because of the 5% contribution by the employees now, as well as being flat, no increase in the premium. Some more good news, our PERS pension contribution went down, and I know that's a very rare event to have that happen. That's due to the site account we established last year. And a site account is what's been established by PERS. PERS is the Oregon State Retirement Program. And all or most fire and police are members of that, and we're certainly members of that. And they found over the years that it's a very poorly funded retirement system. So they've tried to do a bunch of different things to address the unfunded liability, which is pretty high for the system. And one of the things they came up with was, well, an agency can put money into what's called a site account. It increases your assets, which would be directed towards retirement for your employees, and then it could offset your rate a little bit. And the program they had last year was we put in $300,000 and the state did a 25% match. So we get credit for our retirement for our unfunded liability of $375,000. And that resulted in our contribution rate going from 26.4% to 23.2% of wages. So that's about a $23,000 per year decrease. So we were very happy to see that. You lose control of that $300,000. We can never get that back. It does have SVFR's name on it, but the state will maintain control of that in the PERS account. And then it increases every year with the investments the state makes with all PERS funding. So it was a pretty good deal. We tried to get the ambulance district in it last year as well. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it. The competition was later on when Western Lane was eligible. The competition just, I think we're 26 on the list to be eligible to put any money for them. So so we did see a decrease in our PERS costs, which was nice to see. So here's a summary, and you can see again salaries and benefits are down a little bit, and overtime is up. And I think I've tried to bring up a couple of times. I want to bring that overtime number down, and I think by hiring the one more firefighter per shift, we have the 3 shifts, so a total of 3 firefighters. And then just in general, this is a worst case scenario too. So any questions on personnel services? Okay. Now we can look at materials and services. And I think I've got about 5 slides on materials and services and then a summary slide. So I've broken it down into smaller sections. So in general, you'll see a lot of variability year to year in actual expenses and what we budgeted this year. I do ask my staff, and they're the ones that come with these numbers. I say, be as accurate as you can with your predictions, and normally they are. But sometimes just things happen that are out of our control. But most of these numbers are pretty small, so it's nothing major. Nothing really interesting here, but I think, and Mr. All, this may be in what you're talking about, the recruitment. These are grant funded monies coming in that we ended last year. So we've had to move these. If it's like the background drug test, which are paid for by the grant, we have to pay for now. The physicals and psychovals, again, we're paying for those now, and they used to be with the grant. So our emphasis on recruitment is still there. It's just we've moved the money around now to address where it's really coming from, since it's not coming from the grant anymore.
Chief, what's 6152?
Training, so that would be, maybe hospitality is a bad word for that, but when they're at like a burn to learn, this will pay for like lunch or for the Gatorade for the trainings. It's just when they're at those all-day trainings,
Right.
and there's no way that they can get out for lunch.
Okay.
You see, we've dropped it, and we don't really spend a lot on that. I'd be happy to do more, get more people at training. A lot of the time, the food's donated, and the auxiliary will come out. I know a couple years ago they came out and cooked hot dogs for everybody, and that was nice. Good question, though. Some more materials and services. There are a few acronyms on this page, so I wanted to address those. So on line 24, Image Trend, that's our report writing software. It's software that we share with Western Lane Ambulance District, or they use the same software that we do. So our reports can talk to each other. On line 25, it's Firefighters Response System, or what we call EFRS. That's the firefighter notification app, so we can notify firefighters via a phone app if a vehicle's out of service, or if they're meeting at the station for something, we can notify all the firefighters. Line 26, the public safety answering point, that's what you call a 911 dispatch center. So for us, it's the Florence Police Department where the dispatch center is. So if you call 911, it's going to be answered at the Florence Police Department. And then they have radios, and they would notify us of an emergency. And so that's a 2-year, they have a 2-year budget. So this will be the same as next year. Then line 27, the Community Emergency Notification System. And this is a Lane County-wide system. So this is so we can notify systems of an emergency. So if you're signed up for alerts on your phone, I think this applies to, I'm not sure, but I think it may apply to the reverse 911 as well. But this is a way we can notify citizens of specific emergencies. For our area, it'd be tsunami or a wildland or earthquake or something like that. Excuse me. Okay. And continue another materials and services. A big one, we're trying to catch up with our facility maintenance. So that's why you see a big increase on line 13. Before we had reset the permanent levy to the maximum allowed by state law, a lot of things had to be cut back. And I think that was replacing vehicles and really upkeep on the station. So we are making a commitment now to doing things like that. And last year we had to replace the HVAC system here at Station 1. My Captain Gray, my logistics officer, gave me a big list of things that we have to do at many of our stations. And this is part of it. I've actually got another line out of capital improvement, which will also address a lot of our repair issues. I guess this line here, this station building maintenance, so we can stay up on top of certain maintenance issues. And, we have quite a few stations and they're getting old now. And so we do have a lot of issues that we have to keep up with. And you see a lot of fire prevention investigation. That would be for the fire marshal, all for his materials and services. And one thing we looked at pretty closely for budgeting for next year is our potential fuel costs. We know fuel has been increasing. And this year, although we budgeted 100,000, right now I just looked earlier today, we're about 78,000. So about 78% to date. So we're close. That's about where we should be. So I'm hoping that I'm fairly comfortable with 100,000 for fuel and then maintenance and lubricants, oil, and things like that. We may have to dip in contingency if that's exceeded a little bit, but hopefully fuel prices will stabilize and it won't be too much higher. So our budget for personal protective equipment, so that would be things like bunker gear and gloves and boots and everything that we need to protect our firefighters. That did go up. A lot of that was, again, paid for by the grant that we had. When I say, and I should have defined that, SAFER grant, it's staffing firefighters. Maybe that's what, I'm not sure what the A stands for, but it's for additional staffing of firefighters. And part of that is to help you recruit for firefighters. So that paid for about 10 sets of bunker gear a year. And of course that grant went away. So we've had to, we consolidated a couple PPE lines, and then we're gonna have to be paying for some of that now. You can say, well, why don't you just get another SAFER grant? They frown on you having multiple SAFER grants without a break. It's supposed to help get you up and running, and then you take over the funding. But certainly in future years, I mean, we're always looking for grant opportunities. So if we can find somebody that wants to pay for bunker gear, we certainly do that.
Ray, did you have a question?
Yes, Chief, and I suspect this is related to what you just described with the PPEs, but line, where are we, 23, small tools, that's, I mean, the increase is not going to break anybody's bank account, but it seems like a pretty large increase compared to previous years. Could you speak to that just briefly, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just we've fallen behind on equipping our engines. And you will see in the budget that we're anticipating we might have a new fire engine next year. Again, that's a grant request. And part of that would be to equip it with the proper tools, as well as a lot of our tools. I mean, they're just getting old. And so now that, we have a good looking budget financially, we're very stable. I said, okay, let's start replacing some of those tools that we need to replace. So a lot of that. I mean, we go through chainsaws, we call them vent saws. And there's a lot of things that just, with all the training we do, unfortunately, they break a lot. And so it does require replacement. So again, it's time to catch up with our tools.
Okay, thank you.
Sir, good question. So here's another more materials and services, and you will see some empty spots in fiscal year 22. Typically, that means that, and here's more administrative cost. Those costs were transferred to Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority. So SVFR is still paying for those, but it's down here in the WellFIA administrative services, and I'll talk about those. But so yeah, if you see office supplies or other admin expenses, typically it's just been incorporated into WellFIA now. And I will go into more depth. I have a slide on WellFIA only. So line 19 and 20, even though those costs are included in materials and services, and that's where they should be, I'll go into more detail on what exactly those are coming up. We did find that these two, community outreach and the Wellfia Fire Marshal position, weren't included in the total, so you'll see a little bit higher total on this page. So this 699, 191 should be a little bit higher than what you were on the budget that you were given, and that's just the Excel formula didn't include the top and the bottom cell, so we've corrected that. So total for materials and services is the 1.1 million. Steady increase. Again, that was with the formation of the authority. A lot of those costs that were transferred to the authority, or a lot of the positions, were paid for out of materials and services. So even though, for example, my salary came out of personnel services at one point with the fire department, and then it was moved to, or at least the part SVFR pays was moved to materials and services. So that's why we see the big increases here. It's starting to stabilize, but certainly there has been an increase. But again, these increases should be associated with decreases in cost elsewhere, and typically they are. So we'll talk about some of our capital outlay for next year. Okay, and like I mentioned before, station repair is a big priority for us for fiscal year 22. You remember we have 60,000 budgeted in station maintenance, which is in addition to this amount, the 100,000 for repairs. And we are in the process of purchasing a new water tender. The committee I'm still waiting for the committee to give me their suggestion which tender they would like. And then there are certain hoops we have to go through per state requirements. But we hope to be ordering a new water tender. We wouldn't pay for it until fiscal year 22. That's why it's in next year's budget. I'd hope that we could get the purchase this year. So you'll see this 410,000 in this year's budget. We're not getting two water tenders. There's only one. This 410 is not going to be spent, so we reappropriated it for next year, so we could get that tender. We're going to be replacing. And then we also requested. We put in a grant request for a new rescue engine. That's a fire engine. That would be 95% grant funded with a 5% match that comes from us. Typically, it's tough to get these grants, but you don't get it unless you apply. So we applied, and we're hopeful. And our anticipation was that this would be a fiscal year 23 purchase. And I'll show our capital replacement plan or apparatus replacement plan coming up. But if we can get a grant to fund that, then we'll pull the trigger in fiscal year 22. Now, we'll also be replacing some radio equipment at the Herman Peak communication site. And that's a peak, a mountaintop to the north of here, where we have our radio towers, transmission sites. We have to replace some repeaters, which are essentially transmitters. And we're also putting in a microwave link so that the equipment that we have at Herman Peak will be able to talk to equipment which south of town on Glenada Peak. So that'll give us much better coverage upriver, as well as much better coverage to the north. As you get closer to the tower that's to the north of us, it's line of sight, and sometimes you can be too close to the mountain, and we don't have very good coverage along 101 to the north. So we're hoping that this will help. Well, it should definitely help with our coverage. But we have to replace some of the equipment up there. We had postponed that for a couple of years. We thought we were getting a grant from the USDA, and unfortunately that grant did not come through. They thought we were too wealthy for whatever reason. But this is our share. So we're sharing the cost with Westerly Ambulance District and the City of Florence. And this is our share of that.
Hey, Chief,
Yes.
Sorry, I'm a little late on this. Just a quick question about the apparatus. So
Sure.
if we get the new engine, would we rotate one of the ones that we have to a different station, or and phase out one of the older ones, or are we looking to sell it? Or,
Yeah, you'll see that on the apparatus replacement plan, but it'd definitely be one that's ready to surplus and to go away.
Hmm.
But I will show you. Yeah, it's one it's getting to where is it safe, and it's at one of our outline engine 8, I believe.
oh, okay, yeah.
So it's not used a lot. Certainly not one of our first due engines.
Was that the 93 one?
I'd have to look on the capital plan, but I think so. And I'll go into depth on that. So those are good questions. You see, capital costs are pretty high, but about half of that is grants. So if we don't get the grants, then it'd be much less than that. This year, of course, that 410, you can subtract 410 from that 550 and then move that to this year. So it looks like two big numbers, but really it's much smaller than that. And here we are. Here's our budget apparatus replacement plan. So yeah, so it's I think we already surplus this engine. Yeah, so it's engine 608 is 92. Our plan was to surplus it next year anyway, and then replace it. But if we can get a grant to pay for that, we can move that up a year. And what I'm showing here, I guess I should describe it first. So this is the apparatus replacement plan. We use it for long-term planning purposes only. Smaller numbers here you see are the age of the apparatus. And then I use just standard lifespans or recommendations from the National Fire Protection Administration to estimate when you should surplus or retire a vehicle. Typically an engine, a well cared for engine can last 15 years, and then it goes into what we call a reserve status, and that would be in red. And by reserve status is that there's still some life to it, it's still safe, but you wouldn't want to be using it every day. But it's certainly, if you need it as a backup, if one of your main engines is out for repair, or you just had a lot of calls and you needed it, you could still use it. But we say it's in reserve. And then when I have surpluses, that we would be looking to dispose of that equipment, or either sell it, or as we've done in the past, sometimes we give it away to less fortunate departments, fire departments. As you see, engines are typically not cheap, and truck here is in some of this terminology may be a little different. So a fire engine is what you typically think of as a fire engine. A truck, that's a ladder or an aerial apparatus. So if you come to our station 1, you'll see we've got a vehicle that has a ladder on top of it, and that's what we call a truck. And then tender, those are the apparatus that carry 2,000, 3,000 gallons of water. And we have a lot of areas in our community that don't have fire hydrants. So we'll typically bring our own water to a fire. And that's what these water tenders. And if you see PT, that means a pumper tender. So WT is a water tender, and that's pretty much all it does is just carry water. We're trying to get to where we can have our vehicles dual purpose vehicles. So these pumper tenders, they carry a little bit less water, but they have a pump on them, so we can use them for several different purposes. A brush truck is typically it's a pickup that carries some water, and we would use that for wildland fires or small brush fires. That's where you get the brush. And I should probably change those. Those are sort of confusing. That's the terminology we use, but a little confusing. You see, a lot of our vehicles are very old, and it was just something that this department has a history of not getting rid of things. And so we've tried to, okay, what do we have to do? So this one had to go. This one hopefully go next. Engine 604 is in really good shape, so we're going to push it out to 2026. Hopefully we can go that long. I don't see us replacing the truck for at least my lifespan, so that would be the next fire chief that has to deal with that. Water tenders, you can see they're very old as well. So typically, anything built before, certainly before 91, I think when the NFPA standards changed, but these are getting really old. Director Polisi.
Yeah, hi, Chief. Hey, thank you. Chief, are any of these engines capable of being refurbished, basically picking up the pump body tank and putting it on a new chassis?
Yeah, I would
Um,
hesitate on anything that's early 90s.
Yeah,
Certainly, if we had to replace the aerial, I would do that. Usually, you have a lot of time, and then there's no really wear and tear on the.
well,
We would certainly look at that. I
uh,
think.
Chief,
Yeah.
engine 604. The sister to engine 601 is now at Station 4, correct?
Uh, Matt, are you on the line? Is that I don't know for a fact. We'll
I
get
don't
Matt.
know.
Yes, Director Polisi, the sister is at Station 4. Actually, the engine 604, we just used to be old Florence fire engine.
Yeah.
And that's actually our reserve engine right now.
Okay. Is there been any discussion from the apparatus committee about having it refurbished? Because, basically the wear and tear on the apparatus is really not the pump, but the chassis, basically the engine and the chassis that carries the pump and the tank and the compartments and all that. So what I'm getting at is, and I'm, you guys have taken really good care of your apparatus.
Mhm.
And I think that's commendable, but looking at long-term about replacement, when you do put an engine into reserve, it can go in up to 5 years. It's not just 1 year or 2 years. You can go to 5.
Yes.
And the trend now is to take those older apparatus, refurbish them to extend their life into reserve. And I think for our agency, that would be money well spent down the long run.
Yeah.
When you're talking replacement apparatus, Chief, are you talking turnkey, meaning all new appliances, hose, ladders, everything? Or are you just talking the basic fundamental piece of apparatus without all the loose equipment?
It just the apparatus itself, and yeah, if we have to add equipment or if we can, so we just replaced all our hose not too long ago, so
Okay.
there's no reason to buy new hose.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely, yeah, transferring equipment as long as it's it has life left to it and is safe, absolutely. And yeah, I agree with you. I think absolutely we'll refurbish if it makes sense and the vehicle. The box is in good shape. So what we mean by refurbish is that we take everything off of the base chassis. So leave the transmission, the engine, and wheels, take that away, and then just put the whole top of the fire engine down on a new chassis. And typically, you can at least do that once. It's tough to do it multiple
One
times.
time.
Yeah. And it's about half the cost. So
And
it's definitely a cost savings.
so, Chief, my next question is, are you trying to standardize the entire fleet? Meaning that if you're on engine 601 through whatever, every compartment's going to have the same tool in it. The rigs are going to be built the same, hopefully the same builder. So, it's a little bit easier to maintain. And specifically, if you go with a commercial chassis, I think commercial chassis are a little bit easier to work on versus a custom.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's always the goal, is to have everything the same, so you don't have to think about what vehicle you're on. It's so rare that we have a new vehicle.
Yeah, right. I see that.
Yeah,
And
so,
so, Chief,
yeah.
one last question. So eventually, is it the goal of your desire for operations to just have engines, tactical tenders, and no brush trucks?
I do like the idea of a Type 6 engine or a brush truck. They're quicker. We do have a lot of areas really tough to access. And our staffing is so low. I can put 2 people on a brush truck and they can handle a lot. And we can deploy to fires around the state in that. So I would like to have some brush trucks available. I don't know that we need 4.
Right.
And you see, I have talked about
I
replacement.
see that.
Yeah. And then possibly, I don't know that we would, and I think these are more utility vehicles out here later years. But I would like to have a couple small ones, certainly to address a lot of our grass fires. And it's just so much easier to have 2 people, put them out in a brush truck, a Type 6 engine really quick. They can do a lot of fire suppression really quickly.
And then this will lead me to my last point, and then I'll step off. The just a pure suggestion is the apparatus committee. I really hope that they're looking for long-term single source vendor to make it better for the taxpayer, knowing that we're only dealing with one apparatus builder versus multiple.
Yeah, I didn't actually give them that direct instructions, but we are working through, it's a state-approved cooperative purchasing
Right.
agreement. So they don't have that many vendors, and they're good vendors that are there. It's some of your big ones.
So we're
and I
not
agree
going
with
to
you,
be
Jim.
tied to one. We're not going to be tied to one. We have an option to look at what's best for us financially, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Chief,
Because I would just really hate to see us get locked into something to where we're paying for apparatus that granted have big names and so on and so forth, but the long turnaround time for when those units break down.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, and I have been in departments where everything was made by E1, which is a manufacturing, and
Florida.
really, yeah,
Right.
and it changed in 5 years. They're completely different anyway, and so it's yeah, it doesn't make any sense to stay with one. But there was another question.
I was just going to comment, Chief, that with the apparatus committee, one of the bullet points that we're looking for is, yes, we would like the same fleet if we can stay there. However, it's not a set in stone. This is the direction we're going. When we look at the apparatus, is it meeting the needs for ISO, fire protection, everything that encompasses what we do for the community?
Absolutely, thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chief.
Sure. Then I got another page on apparatus replacement. Just the point I wanted to make. So, yeah, I've got this 450,000 in fiscal year 23, but that's that grant that we're asking for in 2022. So if we do get that funded, we replace engine 608 fiscal year 22, and then of course this 450 goes away. We wouldn't, even though our plan is to replace it in 23. Again, tough grants to get, but if we do, then it'll be 450,000 we say, or 427,000 we say. So here's page 2 of our plan. And so I'll talk about what we have here on top, or what I have here on top. It's just an estimate of what we have in our capital replacement fund, which is what we call our apparatus replacement fund, is capital replacement fund, showing the beginning balance, what we spent, what we end up with. I'm very comfortable with this, going out 10 years. As we continue to modify our plans, and we're not going to replace a vehicle unless it needs to be replaced. So if it's in great shape and running well, then of course we push it out. So again, these are all estimates as we go forward. I'm comfortable with having this balance to be about 500,000. And you can see there's 1 year that it's about 500,000, and it starts increasing because we're putting 375,000 a year. And we're not going to do that. It doesn't have to be 375,000 a year. And I certainly don't want 1 or 1.5 million in that apparatus replacement fund. So we will change, either how much we're putting in or how much we're taking out, but that will change. And one thing, the reason I'm emphasizing that is I had that issue with the Western Lane Ambulance District Budget Committee. There's a few individuals that were just focused on what was happening in 2029 and 2030. Please don't do that. Those numbers are going to change, and we will make those change. If it's too low, we will increase. If it's too high, we'll drop those. So those will come down. A few more. So we have rescues, which we're trying to get away from these are heavy duty, more than a pickup truck, but less than a fire engine, and they carry the equipment we need on motor vehicle accidents. So the jaws of life, and which we call spreaders, and all kinds of tools that we need on a motor vehicle accident to get people out of the vehicle.
Ron Green has his hand up.
Mr. Green.
Yeah, probably beyond the scope of what this committee is supposed to do, but I just want to ask you anyway. So I apologize. First off, I appreciate seeing a very, very comprehensive capital plan. This is awesome. But as we look at the capital needs in the fixed asset replacement needs of the district over the next 10 years, and likely what you say is the contribution amount can be and or could be cut back. Based on forecasted expenses, are you thinking about what the revenue stream, particularly from taxation, needs to be, or what it could be if there's a consideration of decreasing the levy rate? Or is that even something, again, beyond the scope of this committee, I realize, but are we doing a 5 to 10 year complete financial forecast as well?
Yeah, we haven't. I think that's something that absolutely I agree with you. I think the board has to address that every year, and that's part of the budget committee process is to approve the rate, and the reason you do that is, do we need that entire amount? And if we don't, then I think the board has the obligation to say, well, no, we don't need that entire amount.
And I only raise that just because of the comment that you made, is that we've put this as the annual expense, and we are able to do that because we've increased the levy, but then we've gone on record to say we might not need that much. So I just hope that maybe there's consideration of that, evaluating that in coming years.
And I can't speak for the board directors, but I would certainly be my recommendation is that,
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason to have a huge savings account. In fact, the state frowns on it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so I agree.
Okay, Jim Polisi, you still have your hand up. Is that from before, or do you have another question?
No, Dina, sorry about that.
All right.
And then we also have, just to show, we have utility and command vehicles. So my vehicle was just replaced this past year. Fire marshal actually inherited our ops chief vehicle. We have a new vehicle. We have a duty chief position. So that's either a volunteer or one of the chief officers that's on duty for a week. And if it's a volunteer, we give them a vehicle they can take home. And we've got all these older vehicles. We're slowly getting rid of them. We're selling these. We had a Crown Vic that we sold. Durango is what actually was my command vehicle when I first got here, and we actually donated that to Swiss Home Deadwood. And then there's some other vehicles. In the future, we'd like to look at a training van for transporting people to some of our trainings. And then we have a staff vehicle, a little Focus. So long term, again, we're only going to do that if it makes sense at the time, but it's nice to put it down at least and then look at it. So all good questions on our FRS replacement plan. So I appreciate those.
Chief?
Yes.
Just a quick question on the rescues with the spreaders and all that. Are you looking at something that we can get away from the hoses and go with battery?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, now they make them, they're so light. I mean, at first it was always a weight issue, but yeah, so what Ned's talking about is now that our extrication tools, the tools that we use to take, a door off a vehicle, were hydraulic powered. So you had to have a power unit and then hydraulic fluid pushing the fluid through the tool. And so you can get, 20,000 PSI with your tools. But now they're making electric ones that are lightweight enough that it's not this huge battery you have to carry. But they're just as powerful. They're expensive, but as we replace our extrication equipment, and we just bought a large amount of extrication equipment. It was used extrication equipment, and we got a great deal on it. It wasn't that old. In fact, I think it might have been demo equipment. So we're probably a few years out, but yeah, absolutely, we'll consider that. And the other thing with these rescues is that most agencies have that equipment on an engine. So if you go to a motor vehicle accident, you need a fire engine there in case there's a fire, and then you need your extrication equipment. So we have to get at least 2 vehicles there, and of course an ambulance is there. So it'd be nice to have the rescue equipment on the fire engine, and that's what I'm used to, and I think that's the model we go to. So if we do that, we may be able to phase these vehicles out. It's just more vehicles that we don't need. So
Okay,
that's down
Erin
the road
Houston
plan.
has her name up, has her hand up.
Oh, awesome, Aaron. Question.
I'm just curious how much that actually is, does that help the speed to get to an accident and the functionality considerably?
To have all the equipment on one vehicle, or
Oh, just the newer updated spreader or the
yeah,
rescue?
deployment is much quicker, and so now we have to have 2 vehicles to get there. If we could have just 1 vehicle with the equipment, the big thing would probably be having enough people to staff 2 vehicles. Certainly, it's a much easier now when we have 24/7 staffing. But yeah, having I don't know that it would get you there quicker to have the newer electric, the battery powered equipment. Certainly helps on the deployment when you're on scene. Just to grab it, you can move around. You're not worried about cutting a hose on any exposed sharp metal. So it's I think it's probably safer in general. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Good question. So here is overall summary of our expenses. As we showed earlier, our materials and services changed a little bit. Oh, we lost Mr. Hall. He's coming back.
I'm just admitting him in.
Okay, good. Welcome back. So our personnel services, actually it went down a little bit, but we have increased staffing. Of course, we moved some of our personnel costs to Welfia, so that's showing up in materials and services. So yeah, we have increased staffing, but our personnel services went down, but then that's offset by, of course, by materials and services. But it's good. We increased staffing, and that's what we told the citizens that we were going to do when we reset the levy. We wanted to increase staffing, and we wanted to start replacing some apparatus. So I'm glad that we can do that, and we are doing what we said we were going to do. One big important change since we distributed the budget, Dean and I were talking about it quite a bit, and so we raised our operating contingency. So that would be funds that are put aside for anticipated but unanticipated emergency spending. You're not really sure it's going to happen, but it possibly could happen. We had it at 100,000. We raised it to 390,808. It was just what we had left over in our unappropriated ending fund balance. That's why it's an odd number. But this would cover 3 additional firefighters. If presented to the board says yes, we want to increase our staffing, it would come out of this operating contingency. I think we would also save money in our part-time budget, which is just on the positive side for our expenses and revenues. But I wanted to make sure that we could afford it, first of all, if we do increase our staffing. So that drops our unappropriated ending fund balance to 1.25 million. And of course, that's what we use for our dry period financing, so that July through November, before we get our tax dollars in November, we need to have funding available so we can survive for those 5 months.
Chief?
Yeah.
Would we be able to use, I know it was a few years ago when we had a lot of folks responding from the department to wildfires in other parts of the state and even California. And so we had to bring people in, our costs went up. We went through our dry period and it was really, really tight. Mm-hmm. And I think it went beyond what we have there. Would we be able to use operating contingency as a backup to the unappropriated ending fund balance that we have?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the unappropriated, you can't use that other than for that dry period, but yeah, you can take funding from wherever. I mean, we can take it wherever we can get it.
Okay.
And I know a lot of agencies that aren't in good financial shape, they'll do loans with banks to get them through that dry period until their tax revenue comes in. I don't think we'll have to do that, but we certainly, I think we have enough funding to do that.
Thank you.
Okay. And just to show you, this is our capital replacement fund. We've gone over that in detail. But again, for this budget year, this is actually going to be 50,000, not 460,000. So these numbers will be, 410,000 higher because of if we do get that grant and then we do buy that engine. Oh no, this is the tender. I'm sorry, this is the tender. Same for the capital improvement plan. I would like to talk to the board at some point. Do we need this capital improvement plan? I mean, we're budgeting for facility maintenance and facility repairs. Does it have to be in a capital improvement fund? It's just easier to budget for it in the general fund. Otherwise, we have to transfer from this fund to the general fund because we don't have a mechanism to pay bills out of this fund. The state allows you to do that. This account just doesn't let us to do that. So it'd just be easier. We just like to move that to a separate line in the general fund, but that's, again, outside the scope of the budget committee, but we'll probably be talking to the board at some point in the future about that. And we're not anticipating transferring any money into this fund. Like I said, we've the 100,000 is going to get in that list. I think I put a list of things we'd like to fix this next year in the budget message. So, Welfia, I just wanted to briefly touch on that. So the SVFR budget, of course, includes a proposal to partially fund the Western Lane Fire and EMS Authority. But I wanted to give our citizen members, the budget committee, an opportunity to comment on the Welfia budget. This budget was developed at a Welfia directors workshop, and then it was reviewed by directors for both Western Lane Ambulance District and SVFR. And it's also been reviewed by the Western Lane Ambulance District Budget Committee. But I want to make sure that our citizens have a chance to comment on it, since it is getting to be a large part of our budget. This year is the first time that Welfia has an amount in the net working capital line, so that would be excess revenue over the year. And the reason we have that excess revenue is that we received this amount from Lane County for managing the mental health mobile crisis response, our MCR team. So they pay all the expenses of the MCR team, and then they paid us $25,735, which was about 10% of the budget, total budget, to manage the program. So it's things we were already doing. So it was a nice addition to our revenue. These funds are being used to reduce the cost to each of the districts. And that was a nice application of those funds. Another big change this year for the Welfia budget was that they decided that the district should split the cost evenly. Last year, the split was 51% for Western Lane Ambulance District and 49% for SVFR. But the boards decided that it should be, and agreed that it would be a 50-50 split this year. Other than the fire marshal position, we did move fire marshal from SVFR to Welfia. It is an administrative position. And so that cost will be charged 100% to SVFR. So any questions on the MCR budget? Or not the MCR budget, the Welfia budget, sorry. Okay. We are at the point where I'd like to start going through, and I'm going to pull up the budget, and sorry to make you go through it again. So you should see an Excel spreadsheet. And so now we'll entertain, so this is the same numbers that you saw in my PowerPoint presentation. It's just now, if anybody would like to suggest a change, It has to be voted on by the committee, but we will certainly be more than willing to discuss it. So any proposed changes for the resources page? Okay, going to the next one, the personnel services. Any changes for that? I'm looking to see, I don't think there's anything. And one of the reasons I want to go through the whole budget is that, you know, if you make a change in one spot, it's usually there's a corresponding change, but we're more than happy to figure out where those corresponding changes would be. And if you have any questions about any of the line items, please ask. Okay, here's and I forgot, I should have defined that. So conflagration, and actually if I go back to resources, you'll see conflag, same thing, conflagration. So $50,000 and then at $50,000. So this would be if we send firefighters out to help other agencies in the state or even other states. We get compensated for that. The firefighters get paid, and then we get compensated if they're career firefighters, if we have to backfill their position, we get paid for that. If we send a vehicle out, we get paid for that. So we just have to budget for it and appropriate it. So that's what conflagration means. Okay. For benefits, again, our health insurance has gone down. So total personnel services, 1.29 million.
Chief, one thing I got a question. You may have addressed that, but line 5183 and 5186.
Mhm.
Nothing budgeted for drug testing and uniforms. And you might have mentioned that. I missed it.
We moved those to materials and services is all.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay.
they're still there, yeah. So they're still there. We drug test all our new hires or new volunteers. And then no, we just moved that out. Yeah, it didn't make sense to have it in personnel services, so we moved it to materials and services. Good question. Speaking of, so here's your drug testing right there in the physicals. So we have training, no change in training, pretty much the same. Recruitment, volunteers, volunteer association dinner. So there is a firefighter association, volunteer firefighter association. They meet once a month. We provide them dinner for, I don't know, they typically have anywhere from 20 to 40 people show up. So it's $150, $200 to provide them dinner once a month. And it's an opportunity for me to meet with them, bring them up to speed what's going on. So I think it's a good use of not very many dollars. Recognition events, we typically try to do a banquet every year. We didn't do it last year. Don't know if we're going to be able to do it this year. So last year we just bought everybody a gift. I think we got everybody a flashlight that hooks to their helmet. But we do like to recognize the tremendous effort our volunteers put into the department. And I don't think we're going to be anywhere close to the $6,000. When we do the banquet, we get close to that, but not when we're just giving them out small gifts. And then we talked about what all these are. Materials and services, page 5. There's the Herman Peak. We own that site, the equipment on that, or the facility, so that we have some maintenance costs up there. Yeah, nothing really there. Again, this community outreach, this on line 2, and then the fire marshal had been left out of, this is page 6, so the page 6 total. The equation just didn't capture them, so we've captured that. Again, the WFIA Administrative Services, that's WFIA, so all the admin staff, so fire chief, ops chief, finance manager, the admin assistants, and the fire marshal is a member, but again, SVFR is only paying for the fire marshal. Oh, here, union negotiation on line 12. we had a very extensive negotiation this past year, and we used up a lot of legal time, a lot of attorney time. So I'm really hopeful that we won't even come close to 10,000 next year. I think we'll have a much more, I hope we have a much more pleasant negotiation next year.
Hey, Chief, is this where drug testing uniforms would be?
It was,
I didn't see it. But,
there's drug testing.
okay, now I see it. It's with background. Gotcha.
Yeah, and then,
And then I think I put uniforms
is
in,
that PPE? There we go.
I think it was in it, the PPEs, that would be personal protection equipment and uniforms.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so we combined a couple lines, but yeah. Well, uniforms are important. Again, website and computer costs, a lot of that, or IT services, a lot of that is going to Welfia. So yeah, it disappears from this part of the SVFR budget, but it'll be included down here. So it's just being moved around. Capital outlay, again, we talked about that. Pumper tender being moved to next year. Might be, here's where that station 1 HVAC that we had to replace. Repeater, as well as some upgrades at Herman Peak. And then hopefully we'll get some grants. So here's our total expenses. Again, we dropped operating contingency, increased operating contingency from what we had originally planned. And we dropped our unappropriated ending fund balance, which was similar to last year. And typically when we have extra funding, we put it in this unappropriated ending fund balance if it's not too much. But really, the extra funding that we had, I really want to go to the board then and see if we can hire additional firefighters. Capital replacement, that would be the apparatus fund. Again, that 410 will be moved up here, so all these numbers will be much bigger. Capital improvement, that would be the repairs that we have to do, the facilities. And that is, so any questions on any part of the budget?
You ready for me to take it back over, Chief?
Absolutely. Here's, if you can see this, here is the, if we get a motion, or if you want to lead a discussion.
Is there any more discussion? Does anybody have any more questions for the chief before we vote on this budget?
I don't have any questions, but I just want to commend Chief, you and the staff on the presentation. The last couple of years have been quite a refreshing opportunity for all of us on the board and on the budget committees. So just thank you for the work that you've put into this. It's been great.
Oh, I appreciate that. Absolutely. I have great staff and they make it easy for me.
Yeah, you can tell Dina's been doing this for a few years now. She's smiling. So if there's no more discussion, no more questions, what I would like is for somebody to make a motion to approve the proposed budget for the 2021-22 fiscal year in the amount of $5,876,926.
I make a motion. This is
Do we
Director.
have a second?
I will second.
Dina, or who's?
Ollie is taking.
Ollie, could we do a roll call vote?
SVFR directors, Director Hickson,
Yes.
Director Polisi,
Yes.
Director Spade,
Yes.
Director Green,
Yes.
Budget Committee members, Raymond Hull,
Yes.
Aaron Houston,
Yes.
Marvin Tippler.
Yes. Now I would like to entertain for a motion to approve the tax rate of $1.5417 per thousand of assessed valuation.
So moved by Spade.
Second.
Seconded by Hull.
Ollie, could we get a roll call vote, please?
SVFR directors, Director Hickson,
Yes.
Director Polisi,
Yes.
Director Spade,
Yes.
Director Green.
Yes.
Budget committee members, Raymond Hull,
Yes.
Aaron Houston,
Yes.
and Marvin Tipler.
Yes.
Okay.
Nice work, folks.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight and your help. It's much appreciated, and not only is it required by law, but it really helps us, think closely about our budget and what we're
So-
spending.
My last point of business is I'd like to adjourn the budget committee meeting.
You may do so.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you
Thank
for all
you.
your hard
Thank
work,
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Up, everybody. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Have a good evening.